giant Alaskan Dogman family. Dear Scary Stories NYC, my wife and I had a terrifying encounter with Russian dogmen in Alaska. We call them Russian dogmen because the matriarch of the trio, or the one my wife thought was the matriarch, was an upright walking version of a Russian bear hound, also called a Russian mountain dog or a Caucasian shepherd. Although the patriarch, according to my wife, seemed to look a lot more like a Tibetan Mastiff, which is an extremely different looking dog. Tibet is now part of China, south of much of Russia. I don't think these two kinds of dogs have a range that normally overlaps, and I don't think either of them naturally roam anywhere near Alaska. But then again, this was not an ordinary Tibetan Mastiff or ordinary Russian bearhounds. Both of these breeds of dog are known for their ferocity and for their occasionally remarkable giant size. These upright walking dogmen seemed as large compared to the normal version of their breed as their breeds are to other dog species. In other words, we witnessed giant versions of giant dogs, and they walked bipedally. I do not know if these creatures live there normally, or if they were brought to the area by humans. I'll just start at the beginning, and you should see what I mean as I get into it. My wife and I had decided we wanted an adventure in the year when we both turned 30. Maybe that was our midlife crisis come early or something, but we both wanted to do something youthful before we completely ran out of youth. Somehow, this morphed into us traveling, initially with a group of friends, but eventually just by ourselves, the two of us, up to the north of Alaska. If you haven't ever been there, the north of Alaska is pretty much the middle of nowhere. Since we were going there as the warmer part of the year was ending, we were really taking our lives into our hands more than we realized at the time. This all happened over 30 years ago now, so I'm telling the story with the gift of hindsight that we both lacked in those days. So I remember driving north on a highway, presumably Route 11 in Alaska, known as Dalton Highway or North Slope Hall Road, and probably various other names as well. It's got the Alaskan pipeline running alongside of it, and you have breathtaking views of the mountains as you go along. Walk just a few feet off of the road, however, and you're pretty much in the middle of nowhere, especially once it starts to snow. All this just made it more interesting for us. We were basically overgrown teenagers wanting to relive the danger and excitement of our younger days, before we got too old to even consider doing something like that any longer. Given the current state of the world, I'm especially glad that we did this while it was easier for people to travel. If we had this to do again, we would have done exactly what we did, even though we both almost didn't come back from our adventure. That was kind of the point of the trip, though, to face danger, and to remember what it felt like to be fully alive in the moment. This trip actually led to us getting into meditation and other sort of mindfulness practices, but back then, we used danger itself to wake us up into the moment. I'm not suggesting you endanger yourself, so don't try this at home, but I do recommend mindfulness as it accomplishes the same thing without placing you in the dangerous position of staring down giant dogmen in the wild. Let's call my wife Wendy because she's a good little witch. Wendy led the way, marching us from where we parked the car into the wilds of the national park up there, which is called the Gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. We hiked for days with me having no idea where we were going. I called Wendy Magellan because she was the one charting our course. That area of the world is all mountains and valleys, and we stuck to the valleys. There was a little climbing here and there, but mostly it was hiking, not climbing. For the most part, we just looked up at the mountains. I remember it was a beautiful sunny day, relatively warm for the area at that time of year, and we were following the meandering path of a stream running between the mountains. Wendy saw them first, two big dogs sitting down, looking at us from pretty far up the hill, leading to the mountains, which was overlooking the stream. Wendy started to walk up toward them because she loves dogs, and up to that point, she had never had a bad experience with any kind of canine. Of course, I joined her as my wife knows far more about wildlife and the outdoors than I ever will. She had been studying to become a park ranger when I first met her, and although she dropped that as a career path, she still has forgotten more than I will ever learn about the outdoors. We got about a third of the way up the hill toward the dogs, and they just continued to eye us and sit there. I think I noticed first that they weren't as close as they had seemed to be. The walk was taking much longer up that hill than I had anticipated. Stopping to catch my breath, I looked at those big beefy dogs up there and I realized they were a lot further back than they had seemed, and they were very much larger than I would have thought it was possible for dogs to be. I tried to say something along those lines to Wendy, but she wasn't having any of that. She wanted to go pet those dogs, and nothing was going to dissuade her. As we continued up the hill, I saw another kind of dog was now sitting with the first two. It was darker and had a huge mane of hair. From a distance, it almost looked like a big afro, like Angela Davis or someone. Who has a big afro these days? Probably a lot of models and actresses, so you probably know what I mean. It was like a huge dark hair helmet on this dog's head that made his body look small in comparison. But that body was not small. In fact, the darker dog looked even larger than the two lighter colored ones. I was watching my footing as I traveled up the hill with my wife, and each time I looked up at the dogs, something had changed about the scene. At one point, I noticed a puppy was sitting with the adults. Alarm bells went off inside me as I began to truly perceive the size of these animals. That puppy dog was probably larger than the Great Dane I grew up with. Have you ever seen an adult Great Dane? Now imagine a burly, thick puppy that was larger than any of those. Great Danes can be over 6 feet tall when they jump up on you on their hind legs. These are not small animals. If that puppy was bigger than a Great Dane, then those adult dogs looked to me to be larger than adult bears. The sense of alarm gripped my entire body and I stood there unable to move and more than a little bit shocked. It took me a few moments to notice my wife continuing to climb toward the unfathomably large dogs. Those were not house pets. Those were not the kind of animals you walk up to and pat on the head. I didn't like the idea of overruling my wilderness expert wife, but I also didn't like the idea of us getting eaten alive. So I called out to her. Annoyed, she turned around and began lecturing me to keep up. I waved my arms and shouted at her to stop, and her face changed to a look of concern. She could tell I wasn't joking around or being lazy, but she didn't understand why I had stopped. As I watched Wendy looking at me and growing more confused, I saw something beyond her that took precedent over anything else in that moment. I saw all 3 adult dogs stand up, followed by the younger one. I don't mean I saw them stand up on all 4s. I mean I saw them stand up on their hind legs the way bears sometimes do. I waved my arms wildly, and finally Wendy turned around to see what I was seeing. If that puppy stood 6 feet tall or maybe a tad more, and it only came up to half the height of the adults, then how tall were the bigger ones? Before either of us could react, the dogs came running at us. I mean running and skidding down the hill on their hind legs. They did not run like dogs, and they did not walk like bears. They ran downhill, more like how a human would do it than anything else. I'm not trying to say they ran like we do, but they did run bipedally. Bears can't do that. A bear would have come down that hill on all 4s if it wanted to have any speed at all. These creatures were racing toward us, as though they were quite intent on having us for lunch. I saw my wife turn in my direction and begin running toward me and away from the giant dogs. Her face betrayed panic, and that was truly disheartening to me. I was hoping she would have a better plan than I had, but all either of us could think of to do was to run away. Since we were tired, the dogs were rested, and they were sliding down that hill as fast as they could toward us. I accepted we were not going to win this race before I even turned around to run. Tears froze on my cheeks as I ran through the coldness toward the stream. We were doomed. There was no place we could hide from those immense creatures. Our car was literally miles away. There was nothing around there other than the valley, the mountains, and the stream, as we had wandered miles from any road that I knew of. I ran out of reflex, but I expected great pain from behind any second, as we were not going to be able to outpace those canines for very long. I saw Wendy run straight through the stream and keep going, and so I followed her. We were past the water and running up the hill on the other side when I heard a strange sound that reminded me of chains. Turning around, I saw something perhaps even more stunning than the creatures themselves. I saw that they had reached the ends of their chains. Yes, the creatures were wearing harnesses attached to chains, and the chains only reached far enough for them to drink from the water in the stream. Once we had crossed over, they were unable to continue to follow us, as their chains had reached their limits. Wendy and I collapsed in exhaustion and relief and just observed the animals until we had regained enough strength to reverse course out of that section of the valley between the mountains. As large and terrifying as these monsters were, someone had managed to catch them and chain them. We didn't stick around to find out who they belonged to, as we figured anyone big and bad enough to keep giant dogmen as pets or guard dogs was probably gonna be even scarier than the dogmen themselves. Of course, we didn't know if they were guarding anything or if they belonged to anyone. We didn't know anything other than that these were upright walking giant canines, apparently of two different breeds. My other question is, what were those harnesses made of that they couldn't escape from them? When we got back to the States, we began trying to look up kinds of dogs to figure out what we saw. This was before the internet. We went to the library. We really dug into it and became somewhat knowledgeable about dog breeds in the process. What we learned and were told repeatedly was that there are no upright walking dogs in the world. Not in Alaska. Not anywhere. What we did discover, though, was that there are dog breeds that greatly resemble the creatures we saw. The Russian Bearhound, also called the Russian Mountain Dog, or the Caucasian Shepherd, not only resembled two of the three large hounds we saw, but it is sometimes also known to grow to a fairly large size. The darker dog with the huge mane of hair around its head most resembled a breed called the Tibetan Mastiff. Wendy perceived that one as the father of the smaller one, and assumed that one of the other two large bear dogs was the mother. I agree with her that the puppy did look like a mixed breed, so I bow to her wisdom and judgment concerning who was the father or the mother. To me, it's just as likely that the dark one, resembling a mastiff, was the mother, and one of the other two was the father. We didn't get close enough to see who was female or who was male. That there were a family of some sort, though, that seemed undeniable to both of us. Why were they chained up the way they were? Were they property of someone? Or were they chained up to prevent them causing damage in the vicinity? Did someone do it to protect hikers like myself and my wife? Perhaps more importantly, who would or could do such a thing? How does one subdue or capture a bipedal upright walking dogman anyhow? If these creatures were twice the height of the 6-foot-tall puppy, does that mean something even larger than that chained them up? Or could it have been a team of men? And why go through such trouble only to leave the dogs chained there by the stream? Why not show them to the public? I would imagine dogs that size, capable of running bipedally, would be quite a money-maker for the owners, assuming they were owned. Why not either put them on display for profit, or else give them to science for study? Why leave them chained up in the middle of nowhere, in an area hardly ever even visited by hikers? To be honest, we both thought that we'd have learned what these creatures were once we hit a local town, but such was not the case. We described what we had seen to a number of the townsfolk, but they either told us we saw bears, or they looked at us strangely and walked away. Nobody, not one person, shared any stories with us about having ever seen something like that themselves. When we got back to the mainland United States As I've already described, we found no official record of anything like what we saw existing, other than the four-legged breeds I've already mentioned. After realizing it was a mystery, we settled into the comfortable notion that one day soon, someone else would discover and identify these species, and then we would join the world in enlightenment about them. Nothing of the kind has happened, however, and we find ourselves 3 decades later, just as much in the dark as ever. If anything, it's become a bigger mystery than ever before. We feel further than ever from an answer concerning what we actually encountered that day we got chased by the giant Alaskan Dogman family. The Alaskan animal, or Michigan Dogman versus my male. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a short but sweet Dogman encounter for you. It took place in Alaskan, Michigan, about 9 years ago, when I was staying for a couple or 3 weeks house-sitting the beachfront home of my boss, who was away on vacation in Miami. Some important papers had arrived that my boss needed me to send to him, so I packaged them up and began to walk over to the post office, hoping to get there before they closed. To get to where I needed to be for my boss's beachfront property, I needed to walk down Rotter Road and make a right by the baseball field to get to McMichael Road and the post office, which is located a few blocks down. It was winter and overcast, plus it was later in the day and the light was fading anyway. I quickened my step because once that post office closed, I'd have to wait till the morning before trying again. My mind was bogged down with job thoughts, and I wasn't really watching where I was going until I looked up and saw the strangest and most frightening thing I had ever laid eyes on. To be honest, that's still the scariest thing I've ever seen. I'll try to describe it to you as I can close my eyes and see it as though the encounter were still happening in this moment. This was a tall gray wolf, and yet it wasn't that at all. The head was like a wolf, and its eyes shone back at me with an off-white glow. The thing was, that head was 6 or 7 feet off the ground, and the body of the creature, although covered in the same gray fur as the wolf-like head, bore a little resemblance to a wolf's body. It looked almost as though it were a man wearing a Halloween costume of a wolf, but this was a living creature. It had claws and paws, not feet. It was some man-like version of a wolf, and as crazy as this sounds, it very well might have been a wolfman or a werewolf. If that wasn't what it was, then it was something that appeared very much like a cross between our species and a canine one. This thing had emerged from the woods to the right of Rotter Road and had been in the process of crossing the street from my right to my left when I looked up and saw him. I must have made some kind of surprised noise because the dog beast looked in my direction and stopped walking. That was when I saw the eye shine. We looked directly at each other, and we both froze. I was too confused and shocked to do anything but stare, and the dogman, who at first seemed as surprised as I had been, seemed to realize he had the advantage over me. He went from looking shocked to looking very angry in a matter of seconds, and he turned his body to face me directly. The chest on this thing was like a bodybuilder's chest. It did not look like a dog from the front. Or maybe it looked like a superhero version of a dog, I don't know. The arms on this thing were like tree trunks, and the legs looked like steroid versions of a dog's legs, or I guess a wolf's hind legs. But it stood on them the same way we stand on ours. I was amazed, believe me, and I was more or less in shock. I know I averted my eyes from his eyes, and I looked down at the ground. I don't think I was consciously trying to seem submissive to him. I think I just literally was submissive to him. I backed away like a total wimpy Phoebe. I was pathetic. On the other hand, I am still alive, so I guess it was the right thing to do. I have some missing memories between seeing the Dogman and heading back to my boss's house, but the next thing I remember, I was back in that beach house, staring at the wall in shock. As I sort of came back to normal, I realized I still had my boss's package with me. I knew I should call him and tell him I had missed mailing it to him, but I went to bed instead, too confused to talk to anyone that night. In the morning, I sent the package out same day at my own expense. I think I drove to a FedEx or something, I really don't remember. My boss never heard about the Dogman, and I guess he got the package in good enough time so that it never became an issue. I never talked to anybody about that Dogman, and I took the car when I wanted to go anyplace from then on in that area, even on sunny days. When I was going over this in my mind to send the story to you, I came up with a name for the monster, which is the Alaskan animal, since it happened in Alaskan, Michigan. Only then, I realized that there already was a name for this kind of creature, which is the Michigan Dogman. Never a loss and always a win. Our EP today is the wonderful Gwyn. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Gwyn Humphreys. Gwyn gets to see our secret uncensored Sunday episodes, far too wild to ever run on this channel. And you can too. Either join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click that join link under this or any of our videos to become a channel member. Now here's our TV spokespuppy Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.